Well, what's interesting about real estate is if the customer, the client in this case, has $1 million budget, they usually want $1.5 million or a $2 million house, right? If they have $3 million to spend, usually they want a $5 million house, right? So as a realtor, and as I said, I've worked with lots and lots of realtors, as a realtor, you have to be really great at motivating them to love what is on the market, not some imaginary house that hasn't been built yet by the architect of their choice, but a realistic house that exists. And you have to keep motivating them and reassuring them until they understand that that budget in that city is for a 3-bedroom house, not a 5-bedroom house. Or it's for a 3,000 square foot house, not a 5,000 square foot house, or whatever it might be. Or you can put your own pool in and you'll spend less money than if you buy a house with a pool, et cetera, et cetera. All of those different things, you, the realtor, are an educator, just as I'm an educator in what I do. So you have to constantly motivate and inspire them. And it's like herding cats. So you show them the house in their price range, and maybe you go a little bit up because they have needs that you can't meet in those houses. But you're not going to waste your time showing somebody a $5 million house when they tell you they're looking to spend $1.5 million. Now, they can say, you know what, I realize that I gave you an unrealistic amount of money. Actually, my husband and I can go to this number. Well, that's great. You haven't wasted much time. But your job is to finesse for information and keep herding the cats until they buy something that's real and that you can sell them.
Very realistic, Susan. And selling a house the same, right? It's worth more than they're going to ask.
That's right.
Now, what about an objection in something creative like buying a painting or a sculpture?
Well, I have a client who's an incredible sculptor. She's also a photographer, and she is a genius at motivating and inspiring people to get excited about her work, because I saw her at a huge group show in LA, and she's got another one coming up next month. And she's brilliant at this. I mean, she's really, really brilliant. And it isn't that she's just brilliant and motivating people to buy her sculpture or to buy her photography, because she also sends me a lot of clients. She is a great salesperson. What does that mean? A great salesperson can sell almost anything that you put in front of them because of their skills. Now, if you're talking about someone who's never done anything athletic and you want them to sell mountain climbing equipment from Patagonia, that's not a good match. And if you're talking about somebody who really doesn't know much about cars, don't try to get them to sell you, a Ferrari or a Rolls Royce. That's not a job for them. But all things being equal, if somebody has an understanding of the product and service, in this case, a piece of sculpture can make your life completely different, because every time you walk into the room where this piece of sculpture is shown, you will feel whatever the mood is that this piece is supposed to enliven in you. For example, I was encouraging a mutual friend of ours to buy a few of her pieces, which they did. And I kept saying, well, you and your boyfriend, you haven't been together that long, and having those lovers in your bedroom, that's going to be so inspiring. You're going to have this, much more romantic, passionate relationship. And it's true, they do have a much more romantic and passionate relationship, in part because of the pieces of sculpture they bought.
Oh, great sales pitch, Susan.
Of course.
And it played out.
Of course, yes, exactly.
Now, in part 6, the close and the order, there are people who practically close themselves, and then there are the others who are hard to close. And can you tell us about this and how it is as simple as it looks when someone is cooperative?
Well, the first thing you have to know is sometimes they are that simply a joy to work with, and sometimes they're not. So sometimes they're moody and they're having a great day when you speak to them, and they might not have a great day another time. In fact, my rule of thumb is if somebody is so wonderful on the phone, the first time that I want them to be my new best friend, I always prepare myself because they may not be like that the next time. And so you have to treat them as you would treat anybody, which is empathizing with them about what their needs are, clarifying for them in the presentation how your products, goods, services are going to meet those needs, hearing any objections. And here, with someone who's that cooperative, you've got to really motivate them. You don't call it an objection. You say, I'm sure, Janie, that you have some questions, and I'd love to answer your questions because the situation that you have at home with your husband's behaviors has been so painful for you. And I know that you're very excited to learn the 6-part conversation so that you can turn this around as so many of my clients have done. And if she says, no, I get it. I spoke to my friend, Linda, and Linda told me everything. Okay, probably okay. But every time you speak to her, you just want to do a check-in. Don't assume that she's a long-term customer or client of yours and that everything's fine. She may be somebody who doesn't like to complain, and the complaint may be building. So you have to be very careful.
I like that. Good reality check there too. What can we do if someone gives you an order over the phone and then starts to walk it backwards and even cancel it?
Again, it's all about the benefits to them. Nobody's buying unless they get that benefit that product, goods, or services offers is something that's really crucial to them. So when somebody starts to go sideways in sales or any other aspect of life, when a relationship starts to go sideways, when a housemate situation starts to go sideways, whatever it is, you go back to the benefits that the relationship or the housemate deal or the product or services are going to provide. You go right back there and you keep talking about, well, I remember you told me that you've got such and such an issue, and I would just love to remind you how this X95, or whatever I said before, produces this, and produces this. And again, if you're willing to look at some of these 60 pages of testimonials, you'll be able to see how Roberta, living in New Mexico, was able to take a situation which I think you'll read and you'll see is almost identical to yours. And in a very short period of time, she was able to turn this whole thing around. And now they've been married happily for another 5 years. So how does that sound? That's how you do it.
The proof's in the pudding. Okay, well, I think we're overdue for time for a clip. Would you like to tell us what we're going to be viewing?
Yes. So in sales and everywhere else, consistent action is the secret to results. You have to know what action to take, obviously. It's not just about, doing the same thing again and again. It's about using the 6-part for sales, being consistent with that, learning it, mastering it, becoming an expert in it. And so we hope you enjoy this clip.
How can a CEO or president motivate and inspire all of their staff?
Power begins at the top, and then it filters down. And the question you have to ask yourself is, what are you demonstrating? What are you demonstrating? What are you showing them is the solution? Now, this is also true in direct marketing. In direct marketing, it's very clear that you have to show them what to do, and you show them how to do it, and you make sure they know how to do it, and then it's up to them to do it. Because in direct marketing, you're not their boss. It's an opportunity they're either going to take or not take. When you have an employee and you're paying them, it's kind of the same thing, because if you don't find that they're doing their job, you're going to stop paying them. You're going to do something called laying them off or firing them. So the bottom line is you demonstrate what works by doing it yourself around your employees and your coworkers. And little by little, life is a self-select program. People are either going to get with the program and do it, or they're going to acknowledge they don't know how to, and they'll ask you for training, or they won't acknowledge they don't know how to, and they will leave. You'll either motivate them to leave, or they will just leave by themselves. And that's fine, because you can only afford to have people around you who are willing to do what they're paid to do.
Very nice. That's perfectly clear. I get that. I've had that in my past. That's wonderful. What kind of training, I'm curious, do you offer for, let's say, corporate employees so that the staff is capable of this consistent excellence?
Yeah, well, sometimes the company doesn't have a training program. They don't have someone to do their training for them. So that's where I step in. So I do corporate training. So usually I work with the account execs and make sure they have enough sales skills. But sometimes I work with the creative, or I work with operations, or I work with production, because I've done all that for, a really, really long time. And each part of the brain operates in a different way to direct a different kind of action. So if you're in operations, then Fred, if you'd show the map for a second, if you're in operations, then that's the lower left part of the brain, the green. It's getting it done. It's action. It's planning. It's step-by-step functionality. And that takes a certain kind of person who can do that to be in production. Otherwise, they should not be there. Production, operations, it's a certain kind of thinking. That's the same thinking as the bookkeeper, by the way. Though production and operations, they're not necessarily interested in dollars and numbers in the same way, but they've got to get things done. Now, the upper left is, again, that's the logical, analytical, data, dollars, numbers. That's the CFO. The CFO has to be absolutely clear about the bottom line, has to be clear about where the money's coming from and where the money's going, so it's all about that. The upper right brain is the creative, the design element, because you've got to have a vision, you've got to have something that you're inventing. If you're doing some sort of machinery, then it's the person who designs the machinery. If it's an event company, it's who designs the themes and the creative part of the events. If it's fashion, as I was in fashion, it's just the designer, very simple. And the lower right brain, that is where the salespeople live. And they have to be very careful that they don't live in their emotional roller coaster. They have to live in their ability to connect, have people skills, motivate people, and inspire people. So we hope you really enjoyed that, because if you do a little bit of what you need to do every single day, you're going to get your results much, much faster than if you do like a binge and do nothing but that for a weekend and then you walk away from it for a while. So for example, if you're starting a new company or you're looking for a job, the only strategy that has been proven to work is consistent action daily. So that's just another little tip from me, because I've been working with thousands and thousands of people, so I see who gets results and I see who gets fast results. And you want to get fast results, not just results.
We have a lot of ground to cover now.
Okay.
Now, how much of an increase in business do you think people can get if they use your 6-part conversation for sales?
If you do 100% of what works and 0% of what doesn't work, you're looking at a complete transformation. If you have a company, if you own a company, and there are even just 5 employees, if each one of those employees does what works instead of part of what works and part of what doesn't, imagine how much growth your company can have. Imagine the increase in sales. So if you're the only one, the company can double quickly. If there are 5 of you, the company can double. If there are 10, 15, 20, 100, well, what's different there is they're not going to shift their behaviors as quickly because you can't get 50 or 100 people trained that quickly. However, when I do corporate trainings, it's the managers who have to really get more training, because the managers obviously are the accountability coaches day after day after day at the office. So take a look at what your goals are. take a look at what's really important to you, and take a look at 100% of what works and eliminate all of the rest. You'll be thrilled.
Sounds like success on the way. Now, how important is consistency? I know that the video clip that we just saw was about this. Could you explain some more?
You know, there are many, many people who are emotionally inconsistent, moody. And 90% of those people have financial problems at one point or another. And there are some very, very famous people who've suffered from chronic depression or bipolar disorder. And if you were able to look into their financial past, you would see bankruptcies and worse. So this is a proven topic from a metaphysical standpoint. And the only solution is to train yourself out of being emotional, train yourself to use self-empathy, bring yourself back to peace. You have 4.5 minutes of being silent to get yourself back together before you communicate with anybody. And if you don't self-empathize and get yourself to a really peaceful place, and you make the mistake of communicating with others, you will regret it. And please feel free to email me about any of this, but that's a particular one. I can point you to some very interesting testimonials and how disaster had been striking again and again and again. And now one of my long-term clients, who hadn't spoken to me in years about business, his business is like 5 times what it was. I mean, 5 times what it was. Actually, I take that back, 10 times. There was a time when he was hoping that he would do a certain amount of business every month. And now I know how much business he does. And it is unimaginable. And the one thing that shifted in him was he no longer allowed himself to live on an emotional roller coaster.
Oh, I love that story, Susan. So true. Now, I know that sometimes you're doing business with someone who seems so nice and friendly and even cooperative, and then suddenly it all falls apart. What then can we do?
Well, anybody who's, gets angry, gets, to be that complainer, anyone who's just furious because something may have actually happened. I mean, what went on with the Volkswagens and the whole issue about, Volkswagen lying to the different consumers. I mean, that's a legitimate reason, naturally, for somebody who bought a Volkswagen to get very, very upset. So those kind of things can happen. But the real question is, how fast can you convince that customer that you are committed to resolving it? That's the real issue. Once you have convinced that person on the phone or in person that you are committed to resolving the problem, you've got a completely different world. Now, LL Bean, which is one of those great catalog companies, has a real store in Portland, Maine that I visited. And LL Bean used to have a policy where you could return anything to them at all, and they would give you your money back no matter how long you'd had it. I mean, ski boots that had fallen apart that you'd had for 10 years, people were returning. Jackets, parkas that people had had forever, things that people had bought in thrift shops for next to nothing, and then they were taking it to LL Bean. Now that is going so beyond the beyond that eventually they had to, I think it was last year, they finally changed their policy. So I don't mean that. But I mean a commitment to resolving it in any way that's possible. And if you live in a state where they have Trader Joe's, most Trader Joe's have a sign that says, if you don't like it, please return it. In other words, you don't have to eat the whole thing. You can actually return it to them. Now, I have to admit, I never have. And even if I bought something and one of the nectarines was bad, I still didn't. But of course, that's how they're going to stay in business, because if every single person, bought water on the same day, everybody would, go out of business, they'd go crazy. And if everybody returned something on the same day or the same month, the stores probably wouldn't be able to survive. But what we're talking about here is empathizing with the customer and convincing them that you are committed to resolving this in a way that is possible.
Sounds nice. I want to shop there.
That's
Now,
right.
when you're starting a new business, how can the 6-part conversation make a big difference?
You know, a lot of people start businesses and they need money and they don't have money and they don't realize that they've got to sell either a friend or a bank or an investment group on their company in order to have a company. Now, to me, you don't have a company until you make your first sale anyway. You know, a long time ago, I watched a dear friend who was a chiropractor practically go out of business because he thought that having a business was opening up an incredibly glamorous office with an enormous amount of money at a fabulous Park Avenue address, spending a fortune on furniture and business cards and computers and everything else, and he forgot that what he needed to do was fill the waiting room with patients. And he got very, very angry about it. So what you have to do is you have to be able to sell people on your goods, services, products, and you. And that's where you use the 6-part conversation. Because you got to figure out what that other person's needs are vis-a-vis what you offer. You've got to be able to express the benefits in a way that they're going to understand it. If they are investors, if that's what they do, if they're angel investors looking for a company to invest in, then you have to approach them one way. If it's a family member, you approach them another way. If it's a friend, you approach them another way. It all depends on who you're speaking to, and what your pitch is going to be is based on them, not on you. So the overarching principle here is take your attention off yourself. These are your needs, obviously. You want to succeed, you want to do well, but take your attention off yourself and put it on them. When you do that, you'll be far more successful. And believe me, I didn't survive with a new business for 17 years by doing something different from that. It has to be about you guys who call me looking for a free session because you have a problem in your life that you have heard I can solve, or you've read that I can solve, or you just are praying that I can solve. That's the secret.
Now, what about someone who has a tech problem and that they have a also customer service problem?
So I have had a couple of times when my computer suddenly crashed and I got an error message. It's probably happened to you too. Microsoft says, don't start this, you got to do that or the other thing, right? So I have this time around, I have a Dell. So I called Dell and they were fabulous. Fabulous, why? Because the guy understood that I was not a young person who knew most of the things he was talking about, but he understood my needs, that I'm an older person, that I need my computer for business, I am already giving up time to be on the phone with him. I don't want him to either speak to me in a way where he assumes I know everything he's talking about that I have to do. And of course, I also don't want him to patronize me. So the guy at Dell was unbelievable, incredible. And then at the end, he said, now listen, you call me anytime or send me an email and I will walk you through it. Don't worry about it. I'm going to send you an email to make sure in 24 hours that everything's working great. That was the best IT tech person I have ever spoken to in my life, aside from my own IT person who, I hire. So this was incredible, and that's what works.
Well, thank you, young man.
That's right, that's right.
Now, if a customer is yelling in our last couple of minutes here, what can we do?
This is the most important question you could ever ask yourself. When someone's yelling, you never respond. When somebody's being nasty or sarcastic, you never respond. What you do instead is you're silently giving yourself empathy. Silent. I feel really upset because I deserve respect. Breathe. I feel scared because I need to be safe. Breathe. I feel really worried because I need a resolution. Breathe. And by the time you've done that, if you've done this a few times, you'll be able to be calm. And you still have to listen to this person until they stop yelling. What makes a person stop yelling is empathetic listening and later empathetic speaking. What makes someone stop yelling is not what you say when they're yelling. So if you have to move your ear and the phone apart from one another, do it. I would. I wouldn't let somebody scream in my ear. At the same time, you have to move it in such a way that you can still hear what they're telling you, because you're going to need it later on. You have to be able to use the information to calm them down and create a peaceful resolution. No matter what, keep your cool. It's essential. Got to keep your cool.
And much healthier too.
Yeah, I mean, you absolutely have to stay calm if you want a successful relationship with your customers and with the people that you work for or the people that you work with.